Howdy readers, I'm Jason, this is Chapter and Verse, and coming to you right now with a review video. And I'm going to be talking to you today about William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist, which I just recently finished reading for the first time ever. I've seen the film, the original Exorcist film, 5 times maybe. And so here's the thing, and this will be important, I suppose, to how I responded to this book. So the first couple of times I saw The Exorcist were back in college. So this would have been the late 90s. And I liked it. I did really like it, but didn't love it, and kind of wondered what all the brouhaha was about, and why do people hold this film in such high regard. And then when the pandemic started, I read online that one of my favorite film critics, Mark Kermode, regards The Exorcist as the greatest film ever made. And as somebody who is an obsessive list keeper, this really struck me. I watched some videos that he had made about it, some interviews that he had given about it, including one in which he said that he had seen the film more than 200 times. Now, I've never seen any movie 200 times, right? Not Ghostbusters, not Star Wars, not my own number one movie of all time, which is The Thin Red Line, directed by Terrence Malick. I've seen that about 30 times. 200 times is a lot of times. So for him to feel that strongly about it, I said, well, I should watch it again. I haven't seen it in a really long time. And so I did, and it kind of blew my mind. Then I watched it again a year or two later with Kelly. And I think it was Kelly's first time seeing it, and I liked it even more still. Right, so it's a film that, unlike most movies, it's a film that I found growing and complicating in my imagination with each viewing. And most films don't do that. If anything, most films diminish somehow in one's regard for them, the more one sees them. But I had never read the book, and so just recently I just found myself in the mood to read it at long last. And so on Independent Bookstore Day, Kelly and I went to our local new bookstore with a friend of mine and his wife, and we all bought some books, and I went in there hoping to find The Exorcist, and they had it in stock, and so there it was. And it's really great, but before I get into what makes it great, and also its flaws, I just wanted to talk a little bit, I have my notes down here, a little bit about my ability now to identify with this story, with what Chris MacNeil, the mother character in the book, whose daughter is possessed, with what she's going through. So, in the long period between when the first 1 or 2 times I saw The Exorcist, when I was in college, and the most recent couple of times that I saw it, and certainly, reading the book as well, in that 2.5 decade period, between my introduction to it and my current relationship with it. One thing that happened was about a year after Kelly and I got married. She was diagnosed with epilepsy. Now, epilepsy is obviously not possession, but for millennia, and even probably still today in some parts of the world, it is mistaken for demonic possession. And it's easy to understand why. A grand mal seizure is violent, it's terrifying. And the first time Kelly ever had one, So she had had a surgery for the first time ever. She had surgery where she was under anesthetic. The anesthesia lowers a person's seizure threshold and allows a seizure to what they call breakthrough. So anyways, yeah, she and I were in our apartment in Missoula, where I was going to graduate school, and we were watching Wimbledon. We had a futon at the time, and we had it, we repositioned it kind of in front of the TV, sort of lengthwise going out from the TV so that she could lay on it and watch TV down by her feet. And so she was laying on the futon there watching tennis, and I was sitting in a chair next to her. And we're watching tennis, and the next thing I know, I see movement out of the corner of my eye. And I look over at her, and her head is turned to the left, and it looks to me like she's looking behind me, and in the direction of, we had a really big window in our apartment there in the living room, outside of which was the walking path that went in front of other apartments. And it looked to me like she was looking in the direction of that window, and she had a look on her face that was just, it was like frozen terror. And her arms were moving in that direction as well. They had that kind of rhythmic thing that arms can have during a seizure. And I had no idea what I was seeing. What my mind first registered when I saw the look on her face, and when I saw how it seemed as though she was motioning toward the window. My brain told me there's someone at the window. There's some kind of menacing threat at the window behind us. And I spun around, and of course there wasn't anything there. And then I realized there was something else happening with her, something I had no experience of, had never seen, had never really thought about, and she couldn't communicate to me what was going on, right? And I was instantly panicked and instantly terrified, and when the seizure came to a stop, her body just became completely still. Her eyes were open. And it looked to me as though she had died. Like, my brain was telling me that I just watched her die. And I'm screaming at the top of my lungs for someone to call an ambulance. And that was how it all started, right? That was her first seizure. That was how the illness began in her. And reading The Exorcist, I found myself identifying with the character of Chris MacNeil, because her daughter, right, a loved one of hers, is going through this thing, this trauma that Chris can't make sense of, and it's not only something that is happening to her daughter's persona, right? Her daughter's recognizable sense of self is swallowed up by the possession. She's there. She's within her body somewhere. Her soul, her personality is within the body somewhere, but it's just being compressed. It's being held down, and that's what happens. That's what happens during a seizure, is the person that you know, the person who knows who you are, can communicate with you, they seem to have vanished, right? They seem to be completely under the control of something that feels vast and resistant to definition, and that is horrifying. Yeah, as I read the book, she's struggling with doctors not having the answers for her, or answers that are sufficient. I know what that's like, right? I know how difficult it is to listen to doctors try to explain something to you, And they have, so one of the neurologists that Kelly had initially, the guy just had no bedside manner, like zero, right? I mean, he had ice water running through his veins. And it's like he didn't speak English. He only spoke in jargon. And I didn't understand the jargon. So reading about this mother whose child has been somehow disappeared into this unpredictable, volatile condition, and listening to doctors posit this theory and posit that theory and this explanation and that explanation, none of which seem to hold any answers of any kind, and so therefore no treatments, and so therefore no light at the end of the tunnel. I identified powerfully with her character in The Exorcist, in the novel, more so than I've identified with any character, I think, in a very long time. So I just wanted to kind of open with that. Now on to the book, right? So first I want to talk about the flaws, right? Because there are flaws. We're going to start with, let's see, page 150 and 151 in here, and this is the kind of thing that should be caught by an author if they're reading back over their work with any care. Should be caught by a copy editor, by an editor, but they just slip through sometimes, and things like this drive me crazy. It says, when he'd entered the passenger side of the squad car, Kinderman turned, and looking back at the house, he thought he'd seen movement at Reagan's window. A quick, lithe figure moving quickly to the side and out of view. In the space of 5 words, we have quick and quickly appearing together. And that just isn't done. And then on page 163, and this is the literary equivalent, I suppose, of a continuity error in a movie. So Detective Kinderman and Father Karras are having a conversation. Okay, they've been out on a walk. They're having a conversation. Don't talk paranoid. It's nothing but a casual remark. Karras stood up and looked down at the detective, right, who's sitting on a bench. They'd both been on this bench. I could always tell the judge it was a matter of confession, he said wryly, and then added, plainly speaking. The detective stared at him dismally. Want to go into business, Father? He asked him, and then stared out at the baseball practice field. Father? What father? He wheezed. You're a Jew who's trying to pass, but let me tell you, you've taken it a little bit far. Getting up from the bench, Karras chuckled. Right, so Karras has already gotten up from the bench, right? So was this like 8 lines earlier? Karras stood up and looked down at the detective. It never tells us that he has sat back down again. It would make no sense for him to have sat back down again. And then 8 or 9 lines later, getting up from the bench, Karras chuckled. So it's an author not keeping track of what his characters are doing in time, in space. And again, all right, maybe it's just the nerd in me that sees things like that and is bothered by things like that. But that's the nerd in me, I guess. That's why I'm this reader and not some other reader. And then the last little flaw that I pointed out was in the last 40 or 50 pages of the book, the adjective huskily, which is an unusual adjective, okay? But it's used to describe a character's speech not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 or 5 times in the space of 40 or 50 pages, when it hadn't been used at all in the previous 250 pages. I don't remember it being used anyway. So yeah, that kind of thing. It should be caught by an editor. But now, a few things that this novel does extremely well is it establishes mood and setting and characterization incredibly well. throughout, right? So the first instance of this that I wanted to talk about is in part 1, chapter 2. And it's the whole chapter. It's really, I mean, the introduction of Father Karras. He's going to visit his mother in New York City. And this little 5-page chapter, it reads like a short story, right? What did I write here? The chapter has all the compression, the detail, and the tonal command of a great short story. It feels a little bit like the novel might have actually been built around that chapter, right? That Blatty came up with the character of Father Karras and gave us just this little vignette of his life, and then built a story around him that he could inhabit, in which he could be a catalyst for change, a protagonist. Then there's another priest in the book, Father Dyer. Let's see here, on page 237 in this edition. Father Dyer just shows up in Karras's rooms one night, and Karras has just a lot on his mind. He's exhausted. He doesn't want company, but Father Dyer just won't leave him alone. He's not being a nag necessarily. He just sort of invites himself in, and he's looking through Father Karras's stuff, right? And turns out he's searching for lemon drops, right? Father Dyer says, "Got any lemon drops? I've looked all through the hall, but nobody's got any, and man, do I crave one. Maybe two." Dyer broodingly uttered, still prowling, "I once spent a year hearing children's confessions, and I wound up a lemon drop junkie. The little shitheads keep breathing it on you, along with all that pot, and between the two, I've come to think it's addictive." So that kind of detail. It's just a wonderful little bit of character building, right? And not long after that, just a few pages after that, Father Dyer leaves a note for Father Karras with, I think, the key to the language lab there at Georgetown. And he signs the note, the Lemon Drop Kid, which I just think was wonderful. It's charming, it's funny, and it speaks volumes about who he is as a person. Just how playful he is. How even though he sees Karras, is in a kind of dark place in that moment in his life, he insists on being a kind of source of light or a source of levity. And then there's the passage on 318 that was the inspiration for what would become the most famous shot in the film. And it's when Father Marin arrives at the MacNeil residence. And this is from the perspective of Detective Kinderman, who witnesses it from his car. He looked up at the window again and ruefully shook his head. To this place had his haunted logic led him. He shifted his gaze as a cab pulled up to the house. He started his engine and turned on the windshield wipers in time to see a tall old man stepping out of the cab. He paid the driver, then turned and stood motionless under a misty street lamp's glow, staring up at a window of the house like a melancholy traveler frozen in time. You don't even need to have seen The Exorcist to know what image I'm talking about. It's just really great, evocative writing. Now, in addition to being a good story well told, the book has some really profound spiritual and religious thought going on. So the actress, the mother in the story, Chris MacNeil, she's an actress. Her daughter Reagan is possessed. She's an 11, 12-year-old girl. And one thing I don't understand, actually, and I haven't been able to make any sense of it, so the daughter's name is Reagan, and Kinderman, who's the detective, who's a big movie buff, he keeps, on like 3 occasions in the book, he mentions an adaptation of King Lear that's in cinemas then, starring Paul Scofield. He wants to know if this person has seen the new Lear with Paul Scofield. Now, Reagan is a character in King Lear. There's Reagan, Goneril, and Cordelia. And Reagan and Goneril are the 2 cruel sisters in King Lear, right? And do unspeakable things. And so, yeah, so I haven't quite figured out to what extent the text of King Lear, the ideas of King Lear, underpin The Exorcist. If anyone has any insight into that, let me know. I'd love to hear it. But anyhow, so Chris MacNeil, right, the mother, the actress in the story, well-to-do. She has 2 people who live with her. It's a married couple who function as her housekeepers, right? Her cook and housekeeper and blah, blah, blah. And this is Carl and Willie, okay? And it's an old couple from Switzerland, and who we're told had a daughter in the past who had died. So Carl, the character of Carl, seems to be particularly devoted to Reagan, right? He's shown sitting vigil at her bedside in the freezing cold bedroom. This is one of the things that happens, right? That the demon sort of controls in the environment of her bedroom is the temperature of the room. The heater can be on, but you can see your breath in the room. And Carl is shown, just sitting attentive and patient at her bedside multiple times in the book. And toward the end of the novel, I found myself thinking, he's trying to do for Reagan what he had been unable to do for his own daughter. And I thought, when I had that epiphany, I thought, man, that there's something really beautiful about that. But then there's another character who doesn't live in the MacNeil residence, right? She, Chris MacNeil puts her up in a hotel, right? So she has essentially like she's sort of living in a hotel Royal Tenenbaum style, right? It's her residence, but she's at the MacNeil house most of the time. And she's a young woman named Sharon. And she is Chris MacNeil's personal secretary, really. Through the possession in the book, she's asked to do a lot. And she's asked to put up with a lot from Chris MacNeil, who is understandably at her wit's end with what's going on with her daughter. But, Chris MacNeil becomes verbally abusive numerous times with Sharon. And Sharon remains kind of always there. And I found myself thinking, like, how good is the pay as her personal secretary, as this actress's personal secretary, to put up with the stress of this situation and the kind of taxing emotional abuse of being the target for all the anxiety and frustration in this woman. And I just found myself thinking, like, why does Sharon stick around? I mean, I get it, right? She's Reagan's tutor, and she's, sort of helped raise her and stuff like this. But she's not family. She's collecting a paycheck to be there. So I found myself wondering this. And then came one of the best scenes in the novel, okay, and it's during the exorcism, and it's where Fathers Marin and Karras go out into the hallway outside Reagan's bedroom, and they fall into a conversation. They're both exhausted, and they fall into a conversation about what's happening. And Karis, right? Karis, who is the younger priest in this situation, Father Marin has done an exorcism before. He's an archaeologist. In addition to being a priest, his reputation precedes him, kind of thing, right? And so Karis this is all new to him. He's a psychiatrist, right? So he has another discipline as well, just as Father Marin does, and has for much of the book doubted what's going on with Regan, but is at a point now where he doesn't necessarily doubt anymore. He says, then Karis spoke again. We say the demon cannot touch the victim's will. Yes, that is so. There is no sin. Then what would be the purpose of possession? What's the point? Who can know? Answered Marin. Who can really hope to know? And yet, I think the demon's target is not the possessed. It is us, the observers, every person in this house. And I think the point is to make us despair, to reject our own humanity, Damien. That's Father Karis's first name. To see ourselves as ultimately bestial, vile, and putrescent, without dignity, ugly, unworthy. And there lies the heart of it, perhaps, in unworthiness. For I think belief in God is not a matter of reason at all. I think it finally is a matter of love, of accepting the possibility that God could ever love us. Marin paused, then continued more slowly and with an air of introspection. Again, who really knows? But it is clear, at least to me, that the demon knows where to strike. Oh yes, he knows. Long ago I despaired of ever loving my neighbor. Certain people repelled me. And so how could I love them? I thought. It tormented me, Damien. It led me to despair of myself, and from that, very soon, to despair of my God. My faith was shattered. Surprised, Karis turned and looked at Marin with interest. And what happened? He asked. Well, at last I realized that God would never ask of me that which I know to be psychologically impossible, that the love which he asked was in my will and not meant to be felt as emotion. No, not at all. He was asking that I act with love, that I do unto others, and that I should do it unto those who repelled me, I believe, was a greater act of love than any other. And I thought, that's extraordinary. And on the very next page, it reads, some minutes later, Sharon came out of the bedroom with a foul-smelling bundle of bedding and clothing. She's sleeping now, she said, and then she looked away quickly and moved off down the hall. Right, so through the possession, Regan has been vomiting all over herself, has been soiling her sheets and her sleep clothes, just constantly, right? And there are mentions of Sharon having to go in, which she always does without any complaint, without thinking twice, having to administer suppositories to Regan during this battle with the demon. And so for that to come almost directly after Father Marin's discussion of God having somehow communicated to him that it's what we do, right? These acts of service. and for Sharon to come out of Reagan's bedroom with a bundle of bedding and clothing that likely smells of diarrhea and vomit, and to just take care of it. Because in taking care of it, she's taking care of the girl. It's a much more subtle and sophisticated spiritual novel, I think, than it's given credit for being. I think that people read it. I mean, it's how it's marketed, right? The most terrifying novel ever written. It's marketed as a work of horror, right? It's meant to scare us, and it does. It's a creepy book. There's a whole lot of other strata at work in this narrative, theologically, psychologically, even just I suppose emotionally. So what it does to a reader, because it doesn't just frighten us, it doesn't just scare us, it disconcerts us, and it makes us feel unease, and it makes us feel sadness. It's a good book. It's a really good book. And it was made into an even better film. I'm a huge fan of The Exorcist these days. Again, like I said, it's a movie that just grows in my esteem each time that I see it. And this is a book that I will be holding on to and reading again at some point. And I think I will read Legion, its sequel, probably in October. Provided, oh my God. So October has always been my favorite month of the year, right? October has a particular smell in Wyoming. The air is crisp in a way that it only ever is in October. But with all this climate change shit that's happening, it seems, in Wyoming at least, it seems like the start of autumn. And our autumns are really short to begin with. But it seems like the cooling off of temperatures has reached a point where it's been pushed back to November. And October, the last number of years, October, it doesn't feel like autumn anymore. So provided it feels like autumn this year, then I will read Legion. If you have read The Exorcist, or if you've seen The Exorcist, let me know what you think in a comment below. Those are my thoughts on The Exorcist. Thank you for sticking with me, and I will talk to you again at some point. Adios, everybody.